everyone. Today we have very important discussions. This is our 740 episodes. We have our world famous speaker, Professor Ron, as well as Dr. Talib Rafael. Uh, and today we're going to discuss about cities and global economy. Both of them actually expert to develop cities, and they have a huge experience to contribute for the humankind. First, I would like to give chance Professor Ron.
So today, I understand our discussion is about economics and the city. Is that the theme?
Yes, yes.
So, well, to get started, the concept of economics derives from the Greek, and it means the management of the house. It derives from managing the house. And the other word that is associated is ecology, or and ecology is the understanding of the knowing of the house. So in discussing how we look at the world from the urban perspective, we must understand how to manage the city. And before we can do that, we must understand what it is. In other words, it's a two-step process. Understanding how it works, and then learning how to manage with what it is. And if you stop to think about it, the modern city is really very young. There was a time in the 1800s when there were virtually no tall buildings other than the Eiffel Tower. And then along came the invention of the elevator and a number of other technologies that made it possible through with advanced metallurgy. There we go, such as the making of high strength steel. All of these things contributed to transforming the nature of the urban landscape in only the last 100+ years. So humanity has never had a chance to really adjust to this new concept. And what we must understand in our time is how do we develop that urban form in such a way that it's conducive to life, that it's enabling and nurturing to humankind. And what we found is that in context of going vertical with very large urban structures, we have also failed to consider how to manage the original plane upon which human activity took place. I'm talking about just the ground. And what happened in that setting is that the the ground in urban context became impervious. Instead of having nature around us, all we had was people and asphalt and maybe a few rare animals like pigeons and rats and cockroaches. In other words, the diversity of animal life drastically declined, and the forms that remain today are not necessarily the most nurturing and conducive to human experience. So we're in the process of re envisioning the city, and I'm working with a couple of different teams who are uh, looking at this, and I really want to focus as we go forward in our remarks about the mobility layer of the urban form. That is to say, what's happening at the surface? Well, just to start the conversation, I want to say that the forms that we're using now are very much in violation of general principles and, most importantly, the laws of physics. Because here's what happens: I step out onto the street, and together with me, as a human being weighing perhaps, depending, 50 to 100 kilos, I am against these vessels, these machines that have humans in them, but which at the end of the day are machines that weigh about 2 tons. typically that's an automobile, but 10 tons and 20 tons if you start to think about buses and trucks and all these other devices. Then you have people using uh, machines that weigh maybe 20 kilos. And that would be bicycles and scooters and the like. So we have this grotesque notion that we could put all of those elements on a planar surface, the surface of the urban form, and expect to get good results. And I'm sorry, it can't be done. You cannot physically have elements in the urban form which are going at 50 to 100 kilometers an hour, weighing 2 tons, in the same milieu with humans who are like say maybe 50 to 100 kilos. This is a complete mismatch, and there's no way you can fix it, in the sense that there's no way you can have what people in my community refer to as complete streets. This is a new um, fad going around that you can make it work for everybody. You can have concrete mixer trucks, you can have buses, you can have cars, you can have people wearing with a cane, a white cane, and you can have mothers with baby strollers, and you can have people walking with a walker, wheelchairs, and here comes another car. This is not a viable future for humanity. And so, therefore, if we're going to transform the economies of our cities, we have to first understand what they are. So, we must revert back to consider the ecology of the city. And I'll get back to that, but I'd like to yield the floor to Mr.
Thank you
Raphael.
so much. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you,
Mr.
Professor
Ram.
Ron. Now I request Dr. Talib. Yes.
Okay, I have to forgive me
Dr.
for my
Talib.
voice. I have a
Yes.
little cold. I have a little cold, so my voice is not going to be that good. But I hope you're hearing me well. You are. Good. Good. Now, cities are like Professor Ron started by defining what's economy. I want to define the cities. Cities come from the word civitas, which is a Greek word also. Cities started during the Greek and the Roman empires. And cities are very important in man's life because they grew with mankind. I am not for the idea of abandoning cities because even what if we do that, cities would continue to be living. Now, it's said that 50% of the population of the world will be living in cities by the year 2030. Well, that's almost half the population of the world living in cities. Cities are also emitting 70 to 75% of the carbon footprint of the world. That's important to know. So, what do we need to do? We need to build cities. We cannot stop building because we cannot stop growing. Growth is a must. Growth and progress are two very important elements in a human life. And we have to continue to enlarge our cities and make them more accessible, more affordable, more human, as they say. I think Professor Ran would agree with me on this. Now, how do we do that? We do that not by not touching the ground or not building any skyscrapers. Skyscraper is not our enemy. Our enemy is a skyscraper that consumes energy, not a skyscraper that is a solar, vertical solar collector or a vertical garden, so to speak. That's a different skyscraper. And the architects are doing this now. They are really beginning to think green when they talk about cities. Cities are very important to mankind. That's what I want to say at this point in time. Now, you had gone through history. Now, cities are the product of the 20th century. Now, the cities that we live in, and they have cars now instead of animals, instead of horses and carriages, like they had before. But they still have the same streets and the same walkways. We need to encourage people to walk a little bit more and just use their bicycles. There are many cities around the world that use that. For example, Amsterdam and Copenhagen are good cities because they don't emit lots of carbon. Many people use the bicycles there. It's a good thing to do. Now, we can find solutions for all these problems. I don't think we should abandon cities at all. Cities are our future. Cities are very important in our lives. Thank you so much. I'll stop at this
Thank
point.
you. Thank you. Professor Ron, if you give some sort of real example of city development, maybe we can use your concept for developing city in South Asia.
Sure. Well, let me say first of all that coming back to this theme of mobility, first of all, it's very important in cities to have a systems overview. In other words, to look at the broader elements, and then later on you can go into the details. But one of the most important elements, as I mentioned a moment ago, is the connection humanity has to nature. So, one thing that has been sacrificed in the modern city to the the concept, I would say, of economics, where if I, as a private landowner, hold a piece of property in the city, my goal most likely would be to maximize the value of that property by improving uh, on the site. And so, therefore, I want to go vertical and exploit the land that I own. As long as that construct is in place, then there's no space or no opportunity for leaving gaps in between buildings. So then what you wind up with is buildings that are like this, cheek to jowl next to each other, and there's no room in between for air or for light or for uh, things to move around. Therefore, it becomes essential for the city apparatus, the governing forces, and then remember back to the term economics, the management of the city, that comes back to the leadership and the people in the political realm who take it upon themselves to understand, first of all, and then secondly, operating on that understanding, do things differently. So the most important thing there is to create open space. That is to say, have parks that are accessible, not by having to jump into a car and drive over to where there's a green space. No, that doesn't fit it. It has to be accessible so that within a very short period of time, anybody can come out of a high rise or a, a dense setting and access nature. So there's two ways to do that. One is to set aside properties for that, and the other is to convert cities. I'm sorry, convert streets into nature. So if right now going out of my house, I encounter asphalt, then I do not have a healthy setting. If I instead come out of my high rise into a street that's lively and has nature and has eliminated the cars, then I have a fighting chance of a peaceful movement within my community, within my neighborhood. So the first step, therefore, is the combination of finding places that can be set aside, even if it involves taking down an existing structure. And of course, there's one other option is that at various levels within the city, there could be parks on the rooftops of buildings. I don't deny that. But again, come down to the street level. Now, let's look at what happens at many streets in the world. One of the streets that I have the most experience with personally, uh, you mentioned Copenhagen. In Copenhagen, there are sections of multiple streets in a row where there is open walking. Only service vehicles come in early in the day to supply the stores and restaurants and such, and they leave by the time the pedestrians arrive in the morning, and they're free of traffic all day long, and therefore they're accessible to bicycles and pedestrian walking. So that's the kind of first elements in design. But now I suppose you're going to ask the question now, what is the what is the other side of the story? Well, if we look at the the modern city, they are being increasingly larger and larger. So it becomes clear that there must be some way to get around rapidly in a city. And that leaves us with two options. One is to go underground, which is appropriate in certain locations, especially at high density, but is extremely expensive. And therefore, we must also look at the other extreme, which is to create mobility above the streets. So yes, it's okay to have high speed in our modern cities, but that high speed must not take place where people are interacting at the ground level. We're designed to work at the ground level. Look at yourself. You have legs, and you don't have wings. Yeah. So we're our anatomy is saying that we belong on the ground level. And so we must develop that ground level for humans. And then the machines that take us places at high speed, they must either be above or below. And since it's at least 10 and probably 100 times less expensive and less and uses less materials, less invasive, uh, going over the streets becomes a very important part of our future. And furthermore, in so doing, we can create canopies which provide shade. And so a combination of shade and mobility at high speed becomes the other key element. So let me put it this way. We've got high density structures that are frankly just 100 and change years old. They're less than 200 years old at the kind of heights that we've come to know today. The second element is mobility on the horizontal plane, above the streets, above the human interaction, the pedestrian level, and a little bit below. But then the third element is leaving spaces where within a very short time, a child, for example, could walk un without
Interrupted.
being at risk of getting run over by a machine to, just a couple blocks over there and to play, uh, play in a field or something like that. So those are the elements, and I can come back later and I'll pull together some things to show you on the screen. But I yield the floor again.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ron. Thanks a lot.
Yes,
Can I say something?
Dr. Talib. Yes, Dr. Talib.
Okay, Dr. Ron,
Sure,
what you're
sure.
saying is absolutely correct. I completely agree with you. We need to have green spaces in the city. We need to do that, even though we can go higher and higher. I have nothing against skyscrapers, nothing against New York and Manhattan, for example, as long as there are central parks in many parts of Manhattan, which is not the case now. Now, whether we do go over or under with regard to transportation, that's a different story. But at the ground level, we have to have people moving around. I'm an architect and an urban designer myself. I was telling Sharif, I was working on a project in Amman, here, Jordan, where I'm speaking from, to fix the sidewalks of Amman. Amman is a wonderful city, but it's mountains and hills. So we have a problem in walking there, and there are no good walkways. So there are three principles that I wanted to exhibit here, and the mayor of Amman had promised me that he would do it. One is to unify the tile. You cannot have everybody using their own tiles to make a pavement. Pavement has to be unified so it can tie things together. Secondly, it's the trees cannot be put in the middle of the pavement of the sidewalks. They have to be on the side so people can move around easier. So they have to give at least 1 to 2 meters of walkway in the sidewalks. Thirdly, you have to have the sidewalks continue, even if the land is not built. Now, if the land is not built here in Jordan, you don't make a sidewalk. You make a sidewalk when you build the land. Now, the sidewalk is a very important element because it ties the whole city together. It's like a piece of cloth that goes around and that ties everything together. That's where the buildings touch the floor, that touch the ground. Now the buildings can touch the ground or touch the sky. The way they touch the sky is very important. You mentioned something about roof gardens. Of course, roof gardens is one of the things because they have to connect with the sky somehow, visually speaking and literally speaking. Now, what you said about cities is very important, but I think cities in the developing world, particularly in our part of the world, are becoming a must. People are looking for jobs in the cities, and they come to cities because they can feel that they are more secure economically, at least, when they come to cities. They don't think about the other things that we talked about. We have to think about them. The city management, city planning has to be very much aware of that because cities are going to grow whether we like it or not. The human beings are growing in numbers, and we can't afford to have them go anywhere else or have them killed or die for with viruses or whatever we have. So people are going to continue to build cities, continue to expand their cities. We have to set the principles right for these cities. Copenhagen is a good example of that. For example, the carbon emission, 75% of the carbon emission comes from cities, really. That's a fact. So we have to reduce that. That's a big challenge because carbon emission makes the cities not bearable. And especially on top of the cities. If you go to China sometimes, you have to wear the mask, even if you're not sick or anything. You wear the mask because you cannot breathe the air. Now, during COVID, they have seen for the first time the blue skies. They've seen the skies, which is a very important thing. Now, we need to do that. We need to do all of that. And I'm with Professor Ran in his description of the cities. But I am also with the fact that cities are a must. And cities are something that does not we don't have a choice to live in cities or not live in cities. People are going to continue to live in cities, whether we
Yeah.
like it or not,
Oh,
because
yes.
cities are very interactive with each other, and cities in city life, you can have more chances of exploring yourself and recognizing your own being. Now, we have to make our cities just as good as our cities ourselves are, or humanity is. And we can do that, like Dr. Professor Ran said. We can do that by creating more open space in the cities. And open space in the cities is a matter of management, it's a matter of government of the city deciding on that or not. Because the height of the buildings and the space between buildings is all in the hands of governments. The government of the city is very important in this regard. So thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Ran.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I
Yes,
I
Professor.
could I could build on that because I think that's really a very important point. That at this moment, I feel that the governmental management people are constrained by the lack of tools to approach this the way that I'm about to describe to you here. I have a little presentation I can show you describing the gradual transition that would be possible in the direction of what I've been speaking. So, if I may show you
Yeah, please, please
something
do.
on my screen, I think this is okay. Let's see here. There we go. Now, I think now can you
Yes,
see
we can
my
see it. We can see. We
okay,
can
great.
see it.
So here's a typical city. This happens to be downtown San Jose, the city where I was born. It's known today as Silicon Valley. When I was a youngster, it was just an ordinary town with a lot of fruit trees. We had orchards. We had the Blossom Tour. It was a beautiful countryside, but the city itself was pretty normal. And as a young man growing up, I had a car, and our form of entertainment was to come to this very part of town and drive up and down the street at night and trying to impress other people with what a nice car I had. So here you see what it looks like today with some trees along the side, a bus lane, um, two car lanes, a lane for turning left or right, and then again a lane on the other side. Where the buses are, you also have parking. So the first bus here on the left is just at the nominally at the place where the um, where you pick up passengers and such.
Yeah,
But now if
station.
we yeah now if we install either below the grade or above the grade transportation system, in this case I'm showing a solar powered system we call solar skyways. You see a vehicle going one in one direction, another in the opposite direction. And we've also made possible a bicycle path in the middle of this. But you notice that these vehicles going back and forth are not separated from these people here, for example, sitting at a sidewalk cafe, by anything other than an 8-inch curb. Well, a curb like this is certainly not enough to make it possible for
Protect.
people
Enjoy their city.
to be safe.
Yeah,
So what we're going to do then is we're going to put in a barrier. Now, those people who are sitting off to the perimeter or standing, sitting at the table here or walking along the street, there's a safety factor, but it looks kind of ugly. So the next thing we could do, couldn't we, is make those into planter boxes and bring flowers and the like into this urban setting. And without changing the number of lanes or any of that, we now have a place that's more pleasant and it's also safe. So the bicycles and the pedestrians are protected from cars by a physical barrier. This is a form of recognizing the laws of physics. We're showing respect to Mother Nature and the laws of physics which Mother Nature brings to us and says, these are here for you to use to your advantage and not to destroy. Now, as people get accustomed to this approach, we can expand this because we no longer need all that traffic because the bulk of the track is being taken care of by either the vehicles below the grade or by the pod car system, solar powered above grade. And we have a lot of space now for people to interact, to have sidewalk cafes and little miniature parks and places to sit and enjoy yourself. And then finally, we go, of course, to recognizing that we need to, even in this setup, to have protection for people beyond just an ugly chunk of concrete, but we can make it a pretty flower area. Then finally, we get it down to the point where we really don't even need that. We only need the automobile lane for trucks and deliveries. Let's say you're going to move your home and you need to move a piano. Well, if you need to move a piano, you need some space for that. So let's leave one lane and have it normally for bicycles, but if somebody's having a moving day, they can move their piano on that day. And then there's a couple other pictures here just showing general principles. Here you show where that type of transportation can be brought in at the mezzanine level. So at the second level of a building, a hotel or what have you, you can come in and interact in that fashion. This is actually based on a real building uh, that my shop is next to, and so forth. Okay,
Doctor, yeah,
so now I stop sharing, I think. Oops.
yeah.
Leave.
Where is he? Dr. Talib, if you want to add anything.
so that's a very, very interesting sketches that we saw. Now, every city in the world has to be going into something like this. I think the problems of the cities are the same problem, whether it's developing world or the developed world. The only thing is that in the developed world, the cities are more controlled and the cities are more in the hands of the governments, which is a very important factor here. Now, what we have in our part of the world are cities where cars are not only emitting their carbon footprints, they're also creating a lot of traffic jams. There's more cars than we can afford in our cities. Cairo is the same thing, just like Amman. And Tehran is the same thing in Iran. I think all of these cities have to be looked at again. Now, why did I mention Tehran and Cairo? Because they are really extremes in that they have licensed so many cars and allowed them all to run in the streets. Now we need to curb that. We need to curb it now, not in the future. Because without that, our cities would not be livable, as Dr. Ran said. I think that the sketches that he done are very important sketches. Now, we need to also encourage the use of bicycles and motorcycles. So motorcycles are a bit dangerous, but still, bicycles are good. Motorcycles are better than cars, definitely. Now, what do we do in this regard? What we need to do is acknowledge the fact that cities have to grow. Cities have to grow, whether we like it or not. Now, not only because of the pressure of the population, because cities have been, throughout history, a main source of inspiration. And I mean, universities first were built in cities. The city became the campus of the university. The campuses were not built outside of the cities until Oxford and Cambridge came into being. That's in the Middle Ages. So cities are very important to exchange knowledge and exchange experiences. It's an important factor and element. Cities are not just places to live in. They're places where people interact, people share their experiences with each other, and become more better citizens, better people, better human beings in life. That's important. I just wanted to say this at this point in time. Thank you so much, Professor Ran.
Thank you, Professor Ron.
Well, to take this one step further, I I want to discuss the nature of economics. I recently was encouraged to read a book describing how people make decisions in the modern city, and we know that economics has in our time been elevated to a science. But I have to challenge that notion because, in fact, economics as we know it today is based on the premise of perpetual motion. And as everybody knows from the laws of physics, there is no free lunch. There's no such thing as something which can run by itself without any input of power from or energy from an outside source. So, given that reality, and given the notion that economics is always built around growth, we see that this is coming to a point of no return. We cannot continue to grow indefinitely. I agree that we will still see growth in cities. That must come with knowledge of what that growth brings to us. And at the moment, we are facing a situation where the things we do in the direction of growth are still predicated, still built upon a finite and non renewable source, and that would be fossil fuels and even nuclear power. These forces, uh, built upon uh, the, uh, the resources of, of carbon producing substances, especially, mean that we are digging our own graves by continuing to build upon that foundation. And we have a growing awareness on the part of people that the actions we take are impacting the 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 air. They're impacting the water systems. They're impacting the air the the soil in such a way that it becomes contaminated. So all of the things that we're doing to propel this growth are unsupportable, unsustainable, and becoming increasingly challenging to find ways around. And so as long as we have extending our existing way of life, expanding our cities, re- going high rise, as long as we're building that on the premise of fossil fuels, we're digging our graves. And so it's important now to begin finding ways to do more with less, to build with a with the tools that we have, but to do it in such a way that they're not depending on fossil fuels. And I come back to the automobile, which I see to be symbolic of our most tragic misunderstandings of the way the world works. Every time any of us, and I do use a car, anytime we use the car, we're taking lives in our hands, not just our own lives, but the possibility that we could run somebody over and create a tragedy for the rest of our lives. I mean, imagine if you had killed somebody with an automobile, your life has changed ever more after that. You have to live that down. So I see that any continuing development predicated on the automobile, whether it's a fossil fuel automobile or an electric powered automobile, it still derives its energy from fossil fuel sources. It takes a huge amount of energy to make the vehicle in the first place, equivalent to depending maybe 150 or 100,000 kilometers just to get the vehicle formed before you start using it, and it's only used for a very short period of time every day. So um, we have started a program called Envision Ride to enable young people to join together and come up with ideas of better ways to get around and better ways of living in the urban setting. So, again, I think that there are ways that we can inspire and move towards a development process which is um, completely based on renewables. But it's important to understand one more thing, that in the process of transforming to non uh, to 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 uh, to renewable and non-consuming devices, we must design them in a fresh way. So, for example, if I take this four-wheel vehicle that weighs 2 tons, and then I make another four-wheel vehicle that weighs 2 tons, and I have an electric propulsion system, that doesn't change the fact that it's a car.
Yeah.
We can transform towards micromobility and the kind of system that I showed before, which is, shall we say, um, high speed mobility without interfering with human activity. So, in the process of going to high speed above the ground, we also can change the artifacts we use on the ground to something that is compatible with human life and does not consume fossil fuels. So, designing buildings that are facing the south in our northern hemisphere and looking north in the southern hemisphere. These are also factors that come into play. So I can
Okay.
say more a little later, but again, I yield the floor.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Dr.
Thank you.
Talim.
Thank you, Professor Rob. Now, I agree with all what you said, but the fact is that we cannot afford not to have cities grow. What is sustainability after all? Sustainability is not just environmental sustainability, it's social and economic sustainability and political sustainability. That's what sustainability is all about. So, sustainability does not mean that we need to worry more about the environment. It means that we have to worry about the environment and the people. Sustainability is simply to sustain life on Earth for future generations to live in more peacefully and more quietly. That's what sustainability is all about. So, cities are very important to us because people are coming to cities to get livelihood, to get jobs, to get work. They come from the countryside. Now, people that live in cities and work in cities and are affording the money to do that, they go into what they call suburbs. Suburbs are different. Suburbs are not urban, but they are a way of going back to the countryside for the rich people only. So it's important to keep that in mind. when we talk about cities, to keep the social impact there, the economic impact of what we decide to do. That's very important. Now, what about Manhattan and Venice, for example? Manhattan, Manhattan, the island of Manhattan was not more beautiful before the city of New York was built. I don't think it was more contributing to mankind and its energy before the city of New York was built in it. The city of Venice was not more more conducive to human culture and human values before it was an archipelago, and then the city was built there. So the city started to expand. The city of Dubai, for example, or Doha, there was deserts there, and the city came to being. So that's all very, very conducive. I think cities have to grow and they have to be built, but cities can be built under the same restrictions that Professor Ron has talked about. I think we need to do that. We need to acknowledge the fact that cities are not something that we could go without in our future, but there are things that we could control. We should control because it's affecting all our lives, all our beings. I mean, I did say talk about sustainability. It's not just environmental, but the environment is an important part of it because you cannot have people sustain life on Earth for our future generations without solving the issue of climate change. You have to deal with that. Climate change is being affected by cities the way they are built now, definitely. In China, in Egypt, in Iran, many, many parts of the developing world, the cities are a problem. Now, there will be more people living in cities. And we have to know that expansion of cities is a must. Cities have to expand. They have to contain the people that want to come to the cities. It's any country in the world have cities and have countryside. And the people that come from the countryside to the cities are not stopped. Cannot stop people from moving around. It's a matter of choice. Cannot eliminate their choice, especially when it has to do with the economic well-being of the people. People are going to work in cities because they find more jobs in cities. That's what I want to say. Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thank you,
Dr.
Professor Ron.
Well, okay, so now we come back to economics, and I understand all that you're saying because indeed we need to have, um, as you say, opportunities for people. We've noticed, of course, it's very simple observation that in more and more of the human population altogether is living in cities. Now the question is, how do we look at the energetics of this phenomenon? First of all, living in cities is more economical than living in the country because you don't have to travel as far to get activities. And so if you look at the first world countries like the United States, here we have people in urban areas traveling long distances to get things done, whereas in the city, you have the chance to use public transit, and your overall personal use of energy might be less. However,
Yes,
if you look at the combination, now that so many people have moved into the cities, it is becoming the case that the bulk of energy consumption altogether in aggregate is taking place in the city. Maybe on an individual basis, it's lower, but in aggregate, it's a much larger now. So, coming back to ecology, economy, managing the city, never mind economics as a study of numbers and dollars and cents and you know rupees or euros, looking at the management of the house, managing the city, we have to begin looking at the energetics thereof. And so, if we're using fossil fuel energies to run these cities, which we mostly are, with coal fired power plants and the like, this is again contributing to a disaster. And we're going to see these cities disappear if we can't figure out a way to accomplish the energy requirements with something other than fossil fuels. So, introducing solar energy the way that we're doing with our transportation system, what we're saying is effectively that we don't need to extract energy from 1,000 kilometers away or halfway around the world and bring them over to us to run our cities. What we can do is to put this solar canopy, and the sun that's right in our streets comes to this transportation system, and we direct it immediately right into the mobility function. And we've designed these canopies in such a way that they will achieve more than 100% of the demand of the mobility system, which means there will be surplus for emergencies and surplus for the neighbors to use, in addition to the amount that's needed just for the mobility system. So here's an example of transforming the urban landscape from an energy consuming to an energy generating phenomenon. It produces its own energy. Now, the second factor is calories of food that we must eat. And so increasingly, we are encountering, if just by observation, not my personal work, but by observation, there are increasing numbers of organizations that are developing vertical farming. One of the advantages given to this is that you have much shorter distances for food to travel from the countryside to the consumer in the city. So vertical farming fits within this category of reducing the energy input from afar. So can an, can a city today operate with its own within its own footprint? Not even remotely possible, because it uses way too much energy in the form of to cover mobility and heating and cooling within the within side of buildings. But also we obviously produce food, and we use fossil fuels to move those foods produced in the fields to the cities, and that's just simply not sustainable. We can't do it that way.
Yeah, I completely agree. We need to change the model of building cities. We need to change the way cities are being managed, and management is very important in this regard, because management is economics, as you said before when we started this session. Now, how do we do that? We do that not by preventing people from building, but by encouraging them, giving incentives for them to build vertical gardens, as we say, to build solar collectors. Skyscrapers can be the solar collectors in the world, can be the best vertical gardens in the world, instead of being consumers only of energy,
Right.
which is not what they're supposed to do. But you don't have to be a skyscraper. You could have a building of 5 or 6 floors only, and that's important to know. Because it's not skyscraper that we're against. It's how and where you build it. That's what we should be against. And the public transportation is very important in this regard, as you said. Now, public transportation has to be encouraged. We should encourage everybody to use public transportation. Public transportation is one of the things that is for free in our part of the countries, of the world. I think it should be for free in many, many parts of the world, just like education and health. These are the three elements that have to be afforded, given to people, because without that, people cannot make it on their own. The economics of living nowadays does not suit that model. So public transportation is a must. Public transportation can be designed in such a way. The solar panels are being used now to light the streets. You know that, Professor Rana. They're using the solar panels to light the streets. Small solar panels on top of each column of light. Now this could become also not just the issue of vertical gardens and using technology to plant vertical things and get the food out of that, but also the fact that we could use our movement system, our cars and our especially public transportation cars and trains or whatever they are. The movement of these cars can generate electricity. It generates non-fossil electricity. Non-fossil electricity. That's very important to do. I Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you. Professor Ron, what's your concluding thoughts for today's session?
Well, I'd like to
Professor Ron?
uh,
Yes.
give an example for you along the lines of what we were just discussing here. I'm currently developing some property in the city of Santa Cruz. It's on the perimeter of town, so it does not have um, the requirements of high density vertical living, but it's a halfway point. And I think that this will give you um, an idea here. Just a second, entire screen, click there, share. Okay, now switch there. So we're developing these
It's a
houses.
city you're developing. It's a city you
Yeah,
are developing yourself.
yeah. This is
Good,
well,
good.
it's about 4 hectares. Okay, total of
Okay,
4 hectares. It's a small parcel.
it's good
So
opportunity.
yeah. So here you see, first of all, we have the solar array on the rooftop of the 3-story building. Over here, you can see just an example of a layout. But one thing I want to call your attention to here is that the the homes are all oriented with the major axis running east-west, which means that if you're looking from the east side, you see a smaller footprint here. If you're looking at from the south, you'll see that all of the structures have access to light. There's
Because
windows that
sun
are
is from the south,
capturing the
of course.
sun.
Sun is from the south.
Yeah. hmm
Yeah.
So you're looking at the house from the south. Now, then to turn to the site plan, I'm going to make this larger here. On the site plan, you see to the left, we have an area that's going to be used for gardening, strictly for growing food. So this is a productive area of food production. And then over here, you can see again, now the south is to the right side of this. So in other words, the sun is coming from this direction here from Delaware Avenue. And each of these structures is separated far enough apart, each one in turn has access to sunshine. So every single home in this development has access to sun. Furthermore, we've set it up in such a way you see in this area here between each of these structures, there's open space, there's green. You're not going to drive your car and have pavement between your house and the neighbor's house. We've relegated the parking to the perimeters of the whole project, and very fortunate we have on the east side, we have this very attractive um,
Seaside.
pond. It's a nature.
It's a natural pond.
Yeah. Let's see. Now I have to figure out how to get out of this. I'm sorry, I'm not accustomed to using that. But just in other words, just to summarize, um, let's see. Stop sharing. There we go. Last time I cut myself off entirely. So in conclusion, there are ways to do this, and these are things that I'm doing to further the understanding we have of working with nature rather than excluding
Dr.
nature
Tal
from the
Rafael?
urban environment.
Yes, definitely. We have to work with nature.
Thank you. Dr.
But not
Talib
every city in the
Rafael,
world,
what's your
not every
concluding
city in the world has the opportunity that you had in terms of space. You have lots of space around you. You can even dedicate a certain big amount of land for agriculture on the northern side of this compound.
Yeah.
It's not possible everywhere. It's not possible everywhere. We should come up with more imaginative solutions for that. Otherwise, the city governors, city mayors cannot work, cannot operate in this regard.
hmm
So that's why I only comment on your sketches. They are beautiful sketches, of course, and the use of solar panels looking to the south is a very important element there. Very important. Now, what do we do with that? we can all of us could go to cities and live in it as we're living now. You know, in Cairo, for example, they wanted to solve the traffic problem. Instead of solving the traffic problem in the city, they decided to build a different capital outside of the city. That capital now is a city. It's a city that's being built altogether, a new city. It's not being built on any of the principles that you talked about, unfortunately. And it's not going to solve the problems of Cairo, which will remain the city of culture, history, and everything else. Now, cities have lots of history. There, we have to respect that. We have to know how to keep that also. These are my concluding remarks, Sharif. Thank you so much. Dr. Sharif,
Ah,
he's frozen as technology. And
it's all good. We can
yeah,
make it work. Well, we've had our time in any event to discuss these
yeah.
matters. Thank you very much. I very appreciate your comments.
Oh
It's
no, I
it's
thank you. I have to thank you. I have to thank you. Sketches that you brought are very important sketches.
well, thank
They're
you
very
again.
important. Yeah.
Yeah. All
For us
right.
as architects.
So I think we'll sign off for the next time.
Yeah.
There he is. You're
Okay, Dr.
back.
Thank
Sharif.
you. Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for joining today's sessions. See you next week.
Okay.
Okay. See you.
Bye
Bye.
bye.
Bye. Bye, Ron.